Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good afternoon from me. Thanks a lot for joining and a heartfelt welcome to this webinar. My name is Corné Dijkmans. I'm the Vice Chair of Atlas, who is hosting this event. Atlas is the global association for tourism and leisure education. And our association is also represented at regional level by sections on all continents. And this event is specifically organized by the Middle East section of Atlas. The objectives of Atlas are to promote the teaching and the research of tourism, leisure, and related subjects, and to promote the connections and the links between institutes in these fields, to make better connections related to research and educational topics, curriculum development, and professional recognition of courses. This afternoon, we are proud to host this webinar, which is entitled The Afterlife of Mega Events, which provides an excellent opportunity to gain state-of-the-art insights into the current and future status of mega events that have been held in the Middle East in the past years, such as Expo 2020, COP28, and the World Cup, FIFA World Cup football in 22. We will have some international speakers about different topics related to the afterlife of mega events, and the webinar will be moderated by Filarezzi Kotzi, who's working at the Dubai campus of Zayed University. So yes, may I wish you all a good and fruitful webinar, some fresh insights and new knowledge as takeaway from this meeting. And I would now gladly give the word to Filarezzi, who will be your facilitator of today's session. Thank you, and Filarezzi, over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Corné, for the nice introduction. I would like to introduce myself. I am Filarezzi Kotzi, and I'm based in Dubai, and I'm the Middle East coordinator of Atlas. And I'm very happy to have the guest speakers today from the Middle East region. And we will start with our first presenter, who is Dr. Camilla Zwart. She's an associate professor and director of the Masters of Science in Sport and Entertainment program at the College of Science and Engineering in Hamad bin Khalifa University, Qatar Foundation in Doha. And she will present today about the legacy of the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. So it's over to Dr. Camilla.
Thank you, Filarezzi, and welcome everybody. It's good for me to reflect on the World Cup, so I thank the opportunity for having me part of this Middle East presentations on the mega events. I am going to stop my video just because I have been having challenges with regard to the with Zoom in particular. And Leontine, thank you for your assistance. We can start at slide 1, please. Yes, as I indicated, and as Filarezzi indicated, I'm at Hamad bin Khalifa University, which is and the Sports and Entertainment Management program is a joint degree with the University of South Carolina. We can go to slide 2, please. So, in order to set the context for this particular presentation, I thought I would share an experience that occurred earlier this year when I was invited to play the game in Norway. So on the 16th of March, 2023, I was approached by Play the Game to be on the program committee on a recommendation of NTNU Business School in Norway. I was initially invited as seemingly one of the critiques after the Odense conference, the 2022 event, was that too many of those who presented were from Europe and the West. Additionally, the gender balance was also biased. On the 21st of March, which ironically coincides with Human Rights Day in South Africa, I received a letter withdrawing the invitation to take part in the work of the Program Committee of Play the Game 2024 on the basis, and I quote, "Your close working relations with state-controlled institutions and authorities in Qatar are unfortunately not compatible with a seat on our program committee." The letter went on to say, on the other hand, in our pursuit of freedom of expression in sport and in recognition of your right to share research results and express criticism of what you regard as Western bias in dealing with the role of Middle East countries in sport, we will still uphold our invitation for you to speak at Play the Game 2024. Given this, I mulled over this a very long time because I wasn't sure if I really wanted to participate. And on the 29th of August, I received further correspondence from Play the Game suggesting I speak on the legacy of Qatar 2022 and the media coverage of the event. Next slide, please, Leontine. So, having experienced this, I then also reflected on an incident that happened at the 2022 Play the Game, and I decided to speak truth to power in the voice of another. I deliberately chose to use the word another in the title, which embraces and accepts as opposed to the other explained as that which dominates, alienates, and excludes. While presenting on the contested and overshadowed legacies of the 2022 FIFA World Cup, which I will share with you in this presentation as well, another colleague was presenting in a parallel session on the World Cup, and a comment was made that allegedly that supporting the World Cup in Qatar was akin to supporting apartheid in South Africa. Now, for someone who grew up and played sport during apartheid South Africa, this statement was at odds with my experience. And I think you all know how sport was used as a political tool to fight oppression and injustice in South Africa. And through it all, we loved sport, supported the anti-apartheid sport movement, despite being denied opportunities to play international sport due to sanctions. And this is just a glimpse into my reality that shaped my journey in sport. Towards the end of last year, on the 15th of October, my father, who's in these images, he passed away. And these quotes are from an extract from a eulogy to my father from a Dr. Ridwan Kreinstein, as it underscores my lived experience. So I took the responsibility for my privilege and chose to draw from my lived experience and research on sport mega events in the global south and in emerging contexts for that presentation, which now sets the context reflecting on the legacy of 2022 World Cup. My father was a school teacher and a deputy principal who was quite prominent in assisting the students during the 1985-86 period of activism in South Africa. And he was remembered for speaking truth to power, which I'm going to share with you in terms of my context of mega events. So we can go to the next slide. So from this image here, we can see that historically, the hosting of sport mega events has been the privilege of developed countries, and it's reinforced their dominant position in the global narrative. It's only recently, with the emergence of BRICS in particular, did we see a shift, especially in relation to World Cups and Olympic Games in more emerging countries hosting sport mega events, including Qatar. However, we kind of see a shift back into the developed world, bar Morocco with a joint bid coming up, and then potentially Saudi Arabia with another joint bid for the FIFA World Cup. We can go to the next slide. Sport mega events, as I mentioned, have become especially attractive to emerging nations such as South Africa and Qatar in their quest for increased visibility and prestige as they seek to attract disproportionate attention for the host to the event. And we'll return to this because this is a major component of reflecting on the legacy. For Qatar, it was the first Arab and Muslim country to host the World Cup and the first in the Middle East, despite this contention. If we can go to the next slide, please. So when reflecting on the legacy, I draw on Holger Preuss's event legacy framework, where he refers to legacy as all the outcomes as a result of the structural changes caused by hosting the event. And this is, of course, a different view on conceptualization of legacy, which starts right from when the bid is won, and it's aligned to the vision. So in this particular illustration, you can see how the World Cup and legacy is actually influenced right from the beginning in terms of alignment to its national vision. What is important is that the structural changes that are left as a consequence of the games impact and has consequences for the city in terms of urban development and environmental enhancement. And then in terms of the people, and I'm going to go through just a few examples to illustrate this in Qatar's case, in terms of policy governance, human development, which means changes in skills, knowledge and network, IP, and then social development in change in attitudes and beliefs and behavior. And one of the biggest challenges for Qatar, given the media contestation that I mentioned in particular, and the very negative narratives on Qatar, is that a lot of the human development, social development has been overlooked. So just from a policy governance perspective, you know, I think although it's contested and argued that Qatar came off a low base, we see a huge range of labor reforms occurring in the country. From mega event hosting in itself, there was a legacy for the World Cup in terms of the integrated sustainability strategy between Qatar and the FIFA for the first time. In terms of human development, I'm just going to cite three specific examples of legacy in terms of enhancing skills, knowledge, and network from the Jasur Institute, which was positioned to enhance event management and sports management in the region, of course, impacted slightly during this period in terms of its regional presence as a result of the blockade against Qatar during this period leading up to the World Cup. Nevertheless, we see institutions like Qatar University introducing a sports science program, as well as, much later in 2019, the program that I'm part of was launched also in terms of had the first Masters in Sport and Entertainment Management. In terms of social development, the often overshadowed legacies in particular is about the inclusive nature of the World Cup and the impact on women in sport, despite it being a men's sport, where we now see Education City Stadium in my backyard being positioned as a hub for women's sport in Qatar. Another particular aspect was what is termed here as ability-friendly sport, so introducing more sport for people with disabilities and programs, and then Generation Amazing, which is a football for development or a sport for development initiative, which is still continuing now in the as a foundation. So we see many different examples of these structural changes. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to share a little bit more, as I mentioned, in terms of looking both in terms of World Cup as well as in South Africa, as well as in Qatar, to just conclude in relation to how sport mega events are viewed within developing or emerging contexts, in that South Africa and Qatar were two very different contexts, but experience the same challenges in terms of the media. And this goes back in terms of social development and changes in attitudes and behavior. As we said, there's this allure for mega events, particularly for developing nations, but at the same time, it becomes a double-edged sword, because the media scrutiny exposes many problems to a global audience, and oftentimes the destination cannot control this image. So both destinations experience considerable negative media coverage, as I mentioned, and in the Western media in particular. If you could go to the next slide, please. So drawing on two studies, okay, the first using mainstream online media sources in key markets for South Africa. We aim to analyze and understand the media coverage and narrative surrounding the World Cup. And in the second one was effectively an extension of the study to social media, and to capture and analyze the narratives and sentiments expressed on social media, specifically Twitter, or now as we know it, it's in X. In South Africa's case, the media attention peaks before the event starts, but positive sentiment continues to be built with a net gain on pre-tournament, the period. So in South Africa's case of overcoming Afro-pessimism and showing a positive view of South Africa, this was key and central to hosting the event. So the negative sentiment was highest in the lead-up period, but it declined rapidly once the tournament commenced. Similarly, for Qatar, if we can go to the next slide, the sentiment breakdown shows a strong representation across both positive and negative views, and perhaps more so than expected. Leontine, you're just going to have to press on this particular slide because it's going to highlight certain aspects. So overall, the volume of the tweets for each frame increased in approaching the tournament start date, with the overall sentiment score improving across the 4 events periods. And as highlighted, there was negative sentiment, particularly in terms of destination challenges, and you can press again. But in terms of the other 3 frames, there was an overall positive weighting, as I indicated, except with frame 3 with an overall negative score. You can highlight, you'll see that now when you press again now, Leontine. So, yeah, and again. So it's a lot more nuanced than was portrayed in the media. So just to wrap up on the next slide. In terms of the overall sides, both studies revealed more nuanced positive and negative views diverging from Western media. And they were both successful in shifting the global views despite the challenges, and then just calling for more studies that are inclusive of a broader narrative, particularly with the advent of social media. And then finally, to conclude, the next slide, by grounding this work in my lived experience, the data becomes a lens to show concrete evidence that another exists. It doesn't say some criticism isn't fair or scrutiny is not needed, but it does show that it's not the only viewpoint, and more importantly, it demonstrates legacy. And for Qatar, the major goal was to change the global image, with positive outcomes generally neglected or overshadowed. So reflecting on this work, a more balanced approach is required. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my reflections on the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla, for the very interesting presentation. And for those of you that are attending, you can place your questions if you have in the in the YouTube channel, and then I think we can take the questions, all of them together at the end of all the presenters. So we will move on to our second presenter for today, and this is Dr. William McCarthy. He's an assistant professor at Zagreb University in Dubai campus, and his research is basically on Disneyland. So today's presentation will be some kind of relation about the aftermath or the afterlife of Dubai Expo and relation to Disneyland and Epcot City. So you can start, Dr. William, with your presentation. Thank you. You are muted.
Yep, thank you. It's been a long time since I've taught on Zoom after COVID, so I totally forgot about the unmuting. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. And so essentially what I'm looking at is the idea of what lessons we can learn from Walt Disney's experience and the Disney company's experience with expos, or at least what in the US is usually called a World's Fair. And primarily I'll be concentrating on the 1964-65 World's Fair in New York City and the aftermath from it, which is Walt Disney trying to use that World's Fair to test ideas, to experiment, to meet the big companies that were at that World's Fair. It was really a kind of a corporate World's Fair, perhaps more than most, and to make partnerships with them for his real dream, which was to create a city. Not a city where the World's Fair was located, which was in New York City in Flushing Meadow Park, but his dream was to do it in Florida, where at the time people didn't know because he was doing it secretly, but he was buying up about 27,000 acres of land in Central Florida that would eventually become Walt Disney World, but that wasn't really what he wanted. What he wanted was to create a city based on the best urban planning, design, futurism, and using the World's Fair in 64-65 as a bit of a showcase. And what you see here in this opening slide is Walt Disney actually in his last video that he made before he died, about 6 weeks before he died. And in this iconic video, he is presenting his idea of what he called Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And in this, he's showcasing all these kind of new technologies and new ideas. And just for right now, I just want to kind of have you keep in mind this this screenshot of Walt Disney with the gray suit and the black tie, the little white handkerchief in his lapel, because you'll see this again, not necessarily with Walt Disney, but you'll see this in a different form of legacy that I'm going to talk about. But let's move on from here. Just very briefly, the evolving nature of legacy at World's Fairs. Greenhalgh, who's done a lot of research at those World Fairs, would talk about that the early World Fairs was basically build something spectacular, and then it pretty much would all disappear afterwards. Maybe a couple of buildings would survive, but most of it would just be built in the idea that it would be temporary. And then later on, particularly with Simone Albrecht's research, she talks about the idea that there needed to be a transition from legacies as simply just being a monument, something left over from the World's Fair that people remember, maybe the Crystal Palace in 1851, which unfortunately got destroyed on a fire. And then with Eiffel Tower, 1889, the Brussels Atomium in 1958, and eventually this transition to a legacy, not just some building left over, but the idea of the place of the expo being a place of urban redevelopment. And Simos Albrecht talks particularly about 1998, the Lisbon Specialized Expo, where it was built in mind with a dual function, that it was built to make visitors happy and festive atmosphere and comfortable, but to have this post-event zone that would be created, a neighborhood where people will live in a financial district. And since that time, the Bureau of International Expositions has kind of encouraged this kind of Lisbon model. It's been adopted and not adopted depending where you've gone. 2010 Shanghai was not about creating a residential area, but creating kind of this kind of development, industrial park. But I think in Dubai, certainly they had that in mind with Expo City, that would follow this kind of Lisbon model. Now, the main takeaway of all this and the change was that we need to think of legacy right from the start, right from the planning stages. It's too late after things are built, and that was where things were meant to go. Now, coming back to the 64-65 World's Fair, like any expo that goes on, there's competition of where it's going to be. And the competition for New York, which won 64-65, or I should put in quotes won, we'll get to that in a minute, was one that was proposed in Maryland near Washington, D.C. by Victor Gruen. Victor Gruen was an Austrian-born architect who is credited with, or maybe some is criticized for developing the enclosed shopping mall, which of course is ubiquitous around the world. And he's given credit for it, though he really didn't want the credit for it because he didn't like the way the shopping malls were designed, even the ones that he designed, because they still emphasized cars over pedestrians. So he proposed in his 64 World's Fair that it would be this a fair that afterwards will become a city. And you can see the cover of his famous book, The Heart of Our Cities. This is not just a graphic design as a decoration. It's a graphic design that's showing what he felt the city would look like, with an urban core that would then circle out into less and less dense populations of where people would live and where they would work. And these white lines would be the transportation systems, and there'd be a green belt going all around it, but it would be circular in nature. And this book became a really big influence on Walt Disney for what he wanted to do at Epcot. However, this becomes one of the what some scholars call the great fair that got away. This would have been an amazing fair if Gruen had been able to do it, if it had been chosen. But instead, it went to New York City. And it went to this guy here on the right, Robert Moses, who in this really excellent biography by Robert Caro, Pulitzer Prize winner, called Power Broker. Robert Moses was the New York City Parks Commissioner, which doesn't sound like a very powerful job. But from the 1930s to the 1950s, Robert Moses was one of the most powerful people in the United States because basically he controlled all development in and around New York City, from northern New Jersey, upstate counties of New York to Connecticut, and of course, New York City itself. And pretty much every bridge and tunnel, highway, museums, parks, this was all you had to go through Robert Moses to get anything done. And Robert Moses wanted a World's Fair in 64-65 for New York. He had been there for the 39 World's Fair, and he wanted to do something even bigger for 64-65. However, he fought with the BIE with things like he didn't want to have only a 6-month World's Fair. He wanted to have 2 periods of 6 months. He wanted to charge money to the exhibitors. He wasn't going to have a midway, which is the way you're going to make money on these things. And the BIE did not approve, which is why I call this the peculiar case, because it's a World's Fair that actually is not an official World's Fair or Expo, even though it goes on to become probably one of the most famous ones that has ever been done. So without the BIE encouraged its members not to go to New York and Canada, Australia, the Soviet Union, most of Western Europe did not put pavilions at the 64-65 World's Fair. Instead, Robert Moses went and he got smaller countries to come and states. States that would be like countries. There's 50 states, so he got 24 U.S. states there. And most importantly, he got a lot of the biggest corporations in the United States involved. General Electric, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, IBM, Bell Telephone, U.S. Steel, Pepsi, DuPont, RCA, NBC Media, Sinclair Oil, Westinghouse, and also Disney to help build the attractions for this World's Fair. And what Disney got out of it is one, that they didn't have to pay to develop these attractions. They were being paid by these big corporations. But Walt Disney used this time to kind of hobnob with all these other corporations. And he was trying to get them on board to eventually build his city of Epcot. That would be his eventual, what he wanted to be his legacy if he had not died in December 1966. Now, talking about the monument legacy of the 64-65 World's Fair, probably the Unisphere is probably one of the most recognizable symbols of any World's Fair or Expo. It was built by U.S. Steel. The park that Robert Moses had started at the 39 World's Fair in this location in Queens, New York, would pretty much be finalized in 64-65, but never became as grand as Central Park, which was what Moses originally wanted for this. And pretty much everything else had gotten torn down there. If you go to this site today, besides a few structures, there's almost no reminder. It's kind of was an old-fashioned World's Fair in the sense that pretty much it got built up, it got torn down. A lot of parts of it got shipped across the country, particularly the Disney attractions all got shipped to Disneyland in California. But the site itself is just kind of a park with a few leftovers like the Unisphere. However, I would argue that besides a monument legacy, the 64-65 World's Fair has a pop culture legacy, probably more than any other World's Fair Expo. Even in the 1893 Chicago Expo, I think more people would be familiar with the 64-65 one for its pop culture references. And for example, the 1997 Will Smith film, Men in Black. The idea, if you've seen the film, is on the left. This is the New York State Pavilion at the World's Fair. And if you've ever been to New York City, particularly if you're going from JFK Airport and you're going to Manhattan on the Long Island Expressway, you'll see the New York State Pavilion from the expressway, and you'll see these circular objects on top, which were the observation decks at the World's Fair. But the joke in the movie is that these were alien spaceships that landed over the World's Fair, and they didn't know how to not make people panic, so they just put up these little kind of poles under the alien spaceships. And so that becomes famous in the film. And then at Universal Studios Park in Florida, they have a very popular ride attraction called Men in Black Alien Attack, and they recreate these observation towers that you can't go up them, but they're decoration for the attraction because they're so recognizable if you go to New York and you come out from JFK Airport, or if you've seen the film. And probably another one that's even a bigger pop culture legacy would be if you've seen the Marvel film blockbuster Iron Man 2. In Iron Man 2, basically the Iron Man character portrayed Robert Downey Jr., his father, Howard Stark, in the film is essentially playing Walt Disney. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see John Slattery, the actor, playing Howard Stark, Tony Stark's father, and he's wearing the exact same suit Walt Disney did, including the handkerchief, the black tie, the white shirt, and in the background, he's got his plans for this city that he wants to build. And in the movie, that becomes a big plot point. And Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark character, Iron Man, has a big kind of party celebration at Flushing Meadow Park, with the Unisphere, the fountains. This is all references to that World's Fair. Even though they call it Stark Fair, it's essentially the World's Fair. Of course, Disney had just bought Marvel for $4 billion in 2009. This movie comes out in 2010. So you have the monument legacy, you have the pop culture legacy. What's not there in New York is this urban redevelopment legacy. And the reason for that is Walt Disney had a plan. He wasn't going to do it there. Just to give a brief background, very brief, on Disney's long history at Expo World Fairs, 64, 65 was not the first one. 1939, first one in New York, he did in a kind of a 4-minute cartoon film for Nabisco called Mickey's Surprise Party, which is considered one of the first moving image infomercials ever made. 1958 in Brussels, Belgium, he created a new 360-degree theater called the Circorama, which was 11 cameras all shooting and then 11 projectors, so that if you stood in the middle and you looked around, it was as if you were in the location. And that was a whole new type of film experience, which hadn't existed before. Walt Disney, one of his biographers, Neil Gabler, says it was the hit, not just of the American Pavilion, but of the Expo, and it was brought to Disneyland. That's kind of a common thing that Disney would do, is it would be done at the World's Fair, but then he would bring it back to Disneyland, would not be in the location. 62 in Seattle, very briefly, again, they hired Walt Disney to do a lot of the operations, the Disney company at the World's Fair in Seattle, and also the monorail, which is still operating in Seattle. The monorail at Disneyland, California, was the first monorail in the Western Hemisphere, and here it was being brought to Seattle. And then at the 64, 65 World's Fair, Walt Disney was hired by 4 different large companies to build attractions for their pavilions. And those pavilions became in essence, as Richard Schickel, who is a critical biographer of Walt Disney, would still say that these were the best exhibits of that World's Fair. One was the Ford Motors Magic Skyway, where you would get in a model of a Ford car, but it wouldn't move by its tires. It would move by a Disney kind of transportation system, and it would take you kind of through history, even through dinosaurs, and you'd be in a Ford Mustang going through this. The Mustang came out in 1964 and debuted at the World's Fair. The Pepsi Pavilion and UNICEF, the famous It's a Small World ride, which is at most Disney theme parks around the world, celebrating children around the world. The Illinois State Pavilion had a Abraham Lincoln animatronic, and then finally General Electric has something called the Carousel of Progress, which was to show invention throughout the 20th century and how electricity was making everyone's lives better, because it's General Electric. That's what they are. They're a consumer electronics appliances company. And then in that Carousel of Progress, there was this huge scale model of 6,900 square foot model of what Walt Disney called Progress City. And this is really what he wanted to get at. This was the blueprint for what he called Epcot. And what he wanted is what Andre Bazin, the film scholar, would say is the total cinema experience. A cinematized perfect illusion and a reproduction to play, to movie studio lot and a city kind of blurring the lines and coming together. And a lot of inspiration that Disney took for this came from Victor Gruen's book, Heart of Our Cities, which, of course, Gruen lost the right to do the 64 World's Fair to Robert Moses and New York City. So Walt Disney kind of takes those ideas from Gruen and says, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we make this type of city instead? Now, at the same time, Robert Moses is asking Walt Disney, why don't you just set up a big theme park right here in New York City? But again, Disney was already, unknown to Moses, was already buying up land in Florida. And that would be the place where he would want to create his Epcot. So with those 4 attractions at the 64-65 World's Fair, they did not become an urban redevelopment for New York City, but Disney had a purpose for each one that was kind of a testing ground for what he wanted to do at the Florida Epcot Progress City. One was this idea of the people mover, the idea of how do we move people not with cars and not with buses, but in a more futuristic transportation system where everything on the ground is pedestrian. There's no cars at street level. Streets are just for people to walk. If you want to get around, you get up higher, you go on a people mover for short distances. That's what you see here at Disneyland, these little omni movers that go above the city. And then if you want to go a longer distance above ground, you take a monorail. And if you go below ground, well, that's what the trucks are, and that's where the cars are for long distance, but you don't see them anywhere in the city itself. It's a Small World is a representation of globalism, the idea of creating a global city where everyone can live. Agreement with Mr. Lincoln is the idea of blurring reality with science, making things come to life, history, in a way that they couldn't before. Carousel of Progress is taking this idea of, technology and futurism is going to, bring a better life to people through science and technology. So again, just a couple more things and I'll be done. This is the Epcot, what Disney will call the Florida Project. And you can see the map here, very similar to Victor Gruen's Heart of Our Cities. It's all based on these concentric circles, starting with an urban core, and then building out into areas that become less and less densely populated until you have these green belts that surround it with homes, maybe some industrial parks that go around it. And just to give you an idea, a larger idea of the map, you can see there how large it was going to be. The transportation systems, the monorails will come right through the middle of it. There will be some underground transportation for cars and trucks. This is another kind of painted rendition of it. The middle would have this kind of beacon, this kind of focal point for the city, which would actually be a hotel and conference center is what he imagined. And you can see how it becomes less and less densely populated as you come out. And these roads are not for cars. They're just going to be for these alternative non-fossil fuel transportation systems. The people mover and the monorail are all electric. You can see here this kind of cutaway, the idea that the monorails and people movers are above ground. You have people on the ground, and then below ground, you could have some cars and taxis and trucks in order to get goods and people from one place to another, but it would be invisible. It would not be something people would see on the ground. Inside the city, right, you'd have different global zones. This is kind of a Scotland area of this Epcot city. Again, you can see the transportation systems. Everyone is pedestrian on the ground. There are no cars to worry about. You can't get injured. But none of that happened. And the reason why that didn't happen is because Walt Disney died in 1966 before he could make his dream into a reality. And instead, his older brother, Roy, who was really good with finances, but was not a creative like Walt was, instead went with this idea of the Epcot that you have today in Florida is essentially a permanent World's Fair, permanent expo. You can see here an early map on the right of what it looks like even today. There's 11 country pavilions around the lake, and then there's a future world, which has like exhibits that you would see at a World's Fair or Expo, though Disney's kind of moving away from the kind of the educational aspect of these future expo and even of the World Showcase and moving towards more of an entertainment kind of based attractions, particularly in the last about 10 to 15 years. But that is what we eventually got with Roy Disney at Disney World. And the question always becomes, would it have been practical? Would have Walt Disney's vision, if he had lived, it would have been taken a lot of money. He wanted to partner with all these corporations to get this done, to get this new prototype city done from scratch. with, you know, just nothing there in Central Florida, would he have been able to pull it off or not? And it's one of the great ifs of the 20th century. Could Walt Disney had solved some of these problems, particularly transportation systems and the way people live and the way people work, or not? And of course, we'll never know. Though we do have Expo City, perhaps, to see what happens in the next few years, 5 years, 10 years. The idea of the 15-minute city, that's essentially what Walt Disney was talking about at Epcot back in the mid-60s. Is this something that is going to be viable and doable? Can it solve the transportation issues and the work issues and the living issues, governance issues that Disney would have faced if he'd been able to put together his dream of the Epcot city? So monument legacy, 64-65, yes. Pop culture legacy, yes. Urban redevelopment legacy, unfortunately, was cut short by Walt Disney passing away. But that torch has been passed down, and it'll be interesting to see what happens at Expo City in 5 years, 10 years, and whether some of that type of dream can eventually come to fruition. There's the references. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. William. We can see your passion about Disneyland and your knowledge. It was a very interesting presentation, and you know, the connection to Expo City in Dubai. So as I said earlier, if you have any questions for the speakers, you can put them on the YouTube, and then we will take all the questions together at the end of the presentations. Now we will move on to our third presentation. And our speaker is Dr. Manuela Gutberlet, and she's a senior researcher and a lecturer at Breda University of Applied Sciences. She has recently published a book on cruise tourism in Oman, and her presentation is about this, but also the relation on the effect it had on after the mega event of Expo 2020 in Dubai. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Filariti, for this kind introduction. A warm welcome, good afternoon, and Masa al khair to everybody who's here with us. I'm very pleased to speak along with Dr. Camilla, Dr. William, and Dr. Adrian. And I'm pleased that we have united different researchers from the Arabian Peninsula. I will just share now my screen and give you a short introduction. First, I will introduce myself again. I'm a senior researcher and lecturer at the University in Breda, University of Applied Sciences, and I'm a research associate at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. And I've recently published a book on over-tourism and cruise tourism on the Arabian Peninsula in emerging destinations. Well, I wanted to ask as well the audience, have you ever been to Souk Matrach, an urban souk, a very prominent destination in Oman, one of the top tourist destinations? So the souk is the main point of my presentation today. And well, the main question of my presentation is, the presentation is not moving. Yeah. What are the socio-cultural impacts of the Expo 2020 Dubai on Souk Matrach in Oman? This is me while doing field research in Oman. I've conducted extensive research in Oman, mainly on the impacts of cruise tourism before the Corona pandemic. Well, I started already in 2011, and until, yeah, when the Corona pandemic happened, unfortunately, and after the pandemic as well, until the start of the Expo 2020 in Dubai. Heritage tourism includes visits to historical sites, including built environments and urban areas, ancient monuments and dwellings, and locations where historic events occurred, and places where interesting and significant cultures stand out. Mega events can bring, as we heard earlier already, benefits and development to host destinations. The existing literature has mainly focused on the economic impacts of mega events, whereas social impacts and their measures remain elusive and highly contested. A mega event is a substitute for the nation, and it put the city on the world map, the city as a spectacle, as we heard earlier in the talk by Dr. William McCarthy, creating urban centers at sites of cultural consumption. The corona pandemic had disrupted businesses and personal lives all around the globe. So too has it disrupted the planning and the execution of mega events, impacting as well intercity and interregional cooperations and tourism. My findings are mainly based on fieldwork, extensive fieldwork, and qualitative and quantitative research. And for this presentation, I've mainly conducted qualitative research, in-depth interviews with local stakeholders and with a few international tourists, in addition to observation, photography, and desk research. Until the corona pandemic, the Arabian Peninsula was one of the emerging destinations worldwide in tourism. Around 3.5 million visitors arrived in Oman in 2019, and only around 700,000 in 2021, which was half the number of tourists that arrived in around 20 years ago. Oman and its neighboring countries were have been expanding the maritime and aviation infrastructure in a very fast pace to accommodate a large number of tourists. In Muscat, cruise ships call at Sultan Qaboos port, which is just opposite to the souk. The majority of the megaliners are on a 7-day trip around the Arabian Peninsula, and they arrive from Dubai, where they stay just 1 day, and they usually arrive then on the next day, on the second day in Muscat, and carry around 2,000 plus passengers and the onboard crew members. And these are ships that carry mainly German-speaking tourists. In my research, I focus on German-speaking cruise tourists, and the ships usually stay for 1 day, and then on the next day they travel to Bahrain or to Qatar, then to Abu Dhabi, and then back to Dubai. So it's a circular travel. And from October 2021 to March 2022, the Expo was held in Dubai, while Qatar was also preparing for the FIFA World Cup. Both mega events were expected to have a spillover effect for the Sultanate of Oman. Around 270,000 cruise tourists arrived in 2019, and only 110,000 in 2020. These, again, the numbers, unfortunately, I couldn't receive numbers for the year 2021. Both during the global standstill of cruise operations, cruise ships were also held responsible for being the cause of the spreading of the corona pandemic, which created as well negative feelings about tourism in the place. Mega cruise travel and flights to European destinations resumed slowly in 2021. Borders had opened for international tourists. on September 21 in Oman. However, cruise liners were not yet allowed to arrive in Oman. To promote international tourism in September 2021, the government introduced free visa fees and for a stay of 10 days and no quarantine for those who had received 2 vaccines. However, there was as well another shock event that happened in Oman. The cyclone Shaheen hit Oman in October 21, flooding parts of the urban areas and the coastline in the north. Then during the Expo 2020 Dubai from November 2021, mega cruise liners like AIDA and Mein Schiff, carrying mainly German-speaking tourists, were traveling on the lower occupancy rate around the Arabian Peninsula. This had led to a slow increase in tourism activities in the souk in Matrach, located just opposite to the cruise liner port. So when the cruise liner arrives, the tourists, they usually either they walk to the souk or they do a city tour, and then the souk is usually the last part of the tour where they stay around half an hour or 1 hour, and then they travel back to the ship or to the port by bus. And these are some views of the souk, beginning of December 21. So the shops, they were adjusting, selling products for the local community, for residents, but as well for tourists. And as you can see, not many tourists were in the place. So this has led to a slow increase in tourism activities in Souk Matrach. However, as you see here as well, the place remained quite empty, and the expatriate and Omani business community readjusted the place and their products to rather local resident customers and to some international tourists. Some started selling online as well, for example, via Instagram. However, the expectations to accommodate, again, large crowds of especially cruise tourists who spent their time and money within the space were not really fulfilled. So in conclusion, the global branding of Dubai and its hospitality through mega events like Expo 2020 has not really had a spillover effect to the souk and Matrach in Muscat. Mega events, however, could be accompanied in future by more social and regional integration of the diverse stakeholders in tourism within the region, building resilience, well-being, and as well connectedness, reducing the vulnerability of locals during mega events. A more holistic approach towards building as well a more regenerative tourism is needed, involving all parts of the society, all different stakeholders, while empowering especially the people. Regenerative tourism ideally promotes a quality everyday life for locals and a quality experience for the tourists, while protecting as well local resources. I feel that more research is needed on the impacts of mega events held within the region. And yeah, finally, I would like to thank you for your attention and hope we will have as well some time for discussion. And please contact me if you have any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manuela, for the very interesting presentation. I would like to move on to our last speaker for today's webinar, and it is Dr. Adrian De Man, and he's a professor and the chair of Department of Tourism and Heritage at the United Arab Emirates University. And his research is on heritage management and cultural tourism. And his presentation today is about COP28 and also the annual meeting in Davos and what kind of sustainable tourism or features come out of these two conferences. The floor is yours, Dr. Adrian.
Thank you, Dr. Filaretti. Give me 1 second, please, if I can replicate what I did in the beginning, share my screen. I believe this should be it. If you can see the first slide.
We can actually see all the slides. Yeah, perfect. We can now see the first slide.
Okay.
Yes,
So
thank you.
Thanks again. Dear colleagues, of course, a very good early evening or late afternoon, depending on where you are sitting right now. It's a pleasure joining this panel with a topic on mega events and tourism. And many thanks again to Filaretti Cozzi and the Atlas colleagues for organizing the event, in particular Leontine, and as well as the other speakers as well. So when I will try to stick to I'm looking at the clock here, I'll try to stick to 20 minutes. If I take too much time, Filaretti, please interrupt me. But when I was invited to participate a couple of months ago, I gave a title that I sort of regretted a couple of weeks later, because it's not my usual field of research. And so last month, I started putting together this presentation, connecting the World Economic Forum, the Conference of the Parties, which is COP. People usually say COP, and it means Conference of the Parties, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and their current strategies for sustainable tourism. So that was these were the three pieces of the puzzle that I was trying to align in such a way as to present something comparative today. First of all, I want to indicate that neither COP or the World Economic Forum meetings can be considered mega events, strictly speaking. So metrics for mega events are first and foremost the number of tickets sold, the number of people attending, of course, media coverage, the costs, the local impacts, and you can quantify this in different ways. But all these categories, all these criteria need to be considered large. And for both these events, we can use proxy data, the delegates. We know how many people attended COP28, for instance, a record 84,000 people in Dubai. The 54th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum was also the largest ever, 3,000 participants in Davos in mid-January 2024. But both events remain well below the traditionally used 1 million cap, 1 million visitors cap, to qualify an event as a mega event. And so, strictly speaking, both these initiatives are not mega events. But the impacts, the resulting impacts, because they have worldwide structural impacts and implications, we might scrutinize them in the same way as we do for mega events, for Disneyland, for instance, for the Expo, and so forth. So we can find, of course, the sustainability of the tourism industry in both World Economic Forum and COP philosophies. They unsurprisingly concur on generic ideas such as stakeholder empowerment, the importance of local uniqueness, authenticity for leveraging tourism activity. But the rationale between or behind these institutions, these events, are very different. They differ greatly. These initiatives cater to specific interests. The former, the World Economic Forum, works as a private transnational organization, spearheaded by its founder and chairman, Klaus Schwab. And by the way, is exposed to criticism. When people say World Economic Forum, a lot of criticism comes our way. Usually, there's a lot of opinions on this, conspiracy theories about manipulation of the market and so forth. And on the other hand, also neoliberal manipulation of our daily lives and so forth. And on the other hand, the COP meetings are climate change mitigation based trans-agency organized by the United Nations. So there are a couple of reports that are publicly available. The travel and tourism competitiveness reports are, you can download them, and these are very interesting documents to read. The Paris Agreement is another landmark that we can use to compare these two initiatives, these two events. But as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, they cater for different audiences. They have different purposes, and they, although tourism can be a specific lens into the activities of these meetings, these yearly meetings, the results and are quite different. So first, I would like to give an overview on COP28. The decisions that were debated a couple of months ago here in Dubai in December, last December, they stem from COP26, where a couple of pathways had been established related with implications to sustainable tourism, and of course connected to climate change. Tourism is based, as we all know, as we all experience as consumers, as tourists ourselves, not as academics, but as consumers. We all know that tourism has a big implication on how we experience leisure product. And so this was something that it was very much at the core of the discussions at COP28. Several meetings, several documents that related to tourism. You can download these documents as well. There's a lot of videos also available on YouTube. The Glasgow Declaration Implementation Report is something that guides. It guided COP27, Sharm el-Sheikh. It guides the coming future as well, and it was very present at COP28 because it focuses on normal people changing their lifestyles. So a grassroots, bottom-up sort of approach instead of top-down institutional bureaucratic decision. It wants to engage citizens into a net zero lifestyle. Of course, this clashes with business activities, with transportation. We all fly to our destinations, especially in this part of the world. So the carbon footprint is very hard to manage and to reduce. A buzzword, an expression that was used again and again and again in all these documents is the circular economy. Circular economy is actually something, if you try to search where it comes from, it is a century-old concept applied to the industry, to the industrial world, but it has been revamped, restructured, and applied to this concept of sustainability and climate change mitigation. Circular economy means more than just recycling our trash, our garbage. It means really creating infrastructures that are a closed circuit, that are regional, And this plugs into some of the ideas that I would like to show in a couple of minutes that are approached in a different way by the World Economic Forum as well. So emissions are a concern. The CO2 emissions, the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a sort of a framework in the background of these COP meetings. Technology is needed. Technology is, of course, central to the tourism production and distribution and marketing and branding. But the idea behind the discussions at COP28 is that technology needs to be used in a smart way, and that bureaucracy needs to be reduced as to avoid the paralyzation through the imposition of excessive rules, excessive regulations. That was the case, that has been the case in the 27 previous COPs that did not solve the issues that have become more pressing, as we saw last week in Dubai and in other countries as well. The climate change is real. The paradox here is that we cannot reduce tourism consumption without destroying the product itself. There needs to be some scale, the scalability of the product, of the offer. We need tourists for the development of a net zero tourism network. And so the industry itself has been concerned about this, namely the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. They promoted a discussion during COP28 called A Pathway Towards Positive Hospitality. Also, they insisted, it's a very interesting 30-minute talk or 40-minute talk available on YouTube. It's worth investing a little bit of our time to watch it. It discusses a lot of these ideas behind not the academic values of circular economy, but about the application, the practical application in the hospitality, in the leisure industry, in practice, on the ground. On the other hand, the World Economic Forum has become a worldwide actor, a political actor, although it is not really a political entity in itself. It is not a transnational, you can call it a political entity, but the legitimacy and the purpose is not clear. Even if you go to Wikipedia and you look at the World Economic Forum, it is built and it is marketed and proposed as an entity, an influence-based entity. It is not a decision-making institution. Still, the diplomacy of influence is important, and if you're interested in what tourism matters to, or how tourism matters to the strategy that the World Economic Forum is dealing with currently in the near future, the Great Reset initiative has to do with precisely a lot of these circular ideas, the ideas of bringing tourism into a world that is more local, that is consuming, that means less travel, that means more reinvention of the regional tourism agents. The risk of a multipolar order is something that pops up again and again in the latest documents related to the World Economic Forum and how they perceive the immediate future. The fragmented world, the polycrisis, all this relates to strategies that are less globalized, as used to be the case a couple of years ago, and more focused on regions and this applies as well to part of their think tank activity through their Future Council on the Future of Sustainable Tourism. How does this apply to the MENA region? We can apply this to several regions, to the GCC in particular, to the wider MENA region, to other places on our planet. The MENA region, first and foremost, is extremely diverse, economically, culturally as well. Morocco and the UAE are worlds apart in terms of inbound tourism, outbound tourism, domestic tourism. The landscape itself, the language, although it's Arabic, supposedly, the dialects are very, very different. So this idea of having a very simple formula that could be applied to the entire MENA region is not appropriate. But this diversity is something that needs to be commodified and transformed into a strength, if you want, in the sense that this diversity can create a number, and according to the COP and the World Economic Forum frameworks, it can create a number of interconnections. It can create a lot of synergies between regions, between certain places that are technically high income and neighboring countries that are low or middle income economies. Transnational regional products that would address tourism demand and tourism consumption in a more sustainable way, in a way that would fit these new paradigms that are being discussed by both the WF and the COP meetings. Of course, this again depends on how consumers on demand, and in other words, how consumers look at it. Consumers only pay money and spend time in places they consider competitive, they consider unique, they consider special, and the business models that are, for instance, in the Maghreb and in the Mashrek as well, Egypt, for instance, the business models that are very, very entrenched there in that part of the world are based on heritage, the pyramids, the nature, the ecotourism, and so forth. And it is not easy to switch immediately to more flexible international trans-regional formulas when the entire production system is based on a certain monocultural product, or heavily based on these monocultural products, and other alternatives might be considered niche. So the mass tourism to see the Egyptian pyramids, for instance, is something that needs to be countered, and some other alternatives need to be found in terms of tourism propositions. Both World Economic Forum and United Nations, they pursue sustainability efforts, economic sustainability, but also ecological sustainability. This ranges from non-for-profit organizations to the industry, the hospitality and the transportation industry. So for-profit business operations need to be part of the solution. This cannot be certain elements of the supply chain fighting others, and some of the non-renewables, in other words, some of the intangibles, some of the intangible heritage propositions, they need to be produced, branded, promoted, and offered in what has been called a pre-competitive cooperation, which means that before you can start competing, you need to agree on, you need to come together and provide a platform that becomes regionally competitive as opposed to other regions. Again, the circular economy is a big is a big concept here. I'll go through this a bit more quickly. So the challenge, of course, for future meetings is to fine-tune these ideas, which look very nice on a PowerPoint and in very clean discussions in an air-conditioned room. But on the ground, this creates a lot of resistance because tourism is a very fragmented industry to start with. And so not everyone will be on board with the same enthusiasm and with the same purpose, including the bureaucratization, the national agencies that are supposed to promote and to put into practice all these ideas. Long-term implications, of course, global. But to enforce them in the MENA region or in any other region, but in this case, the example is the MENA region, especially sub-regions within the MENA region. So the Maghreb, the GCC, Egypt as a standalone proposition very often. They need to be enforced by innovative, smart, interactive, transnational product development infrastructures, and especially also the valorization of domestic markets, because during decades, for many decades, the MENA region has been looking at tourism as an international structure, as an international market. When more and more domestic tourism, we see this here in the UAE, we see this in many other countries, where in North Africa, for instance, where domestic tourism has become an important part of the tourism revenue, needs to cater for not only for international tourism and not for mass tourism, but for these niche propositions that need to be articulated with sustainability and need to tackle climate change as well in their specific regions. That was it. I'm sorry if I took a couple of minutes too long, but this was a quick overview of this comparative vision. In short, if I can leave one message here, it would be we could talk about this for many hours, but the message is that the circular economy and the local and regional focus has become very enhanced, as opposed to the meetings, the COP meetings and the World Economic Forum meetings of just 2 or 3 years ago. This is a post-COVID-19 sort of reality, and this connects with many other ideas, such as climate change, of course. But it is something that you notice again and again when you read one document, 2 documents, 3 documents about how the future of tourism is envisaged. It's a more controlled and more regional future that is being shaped or imagined. And this is a very recent phenomenon. It was not discussed in these same terms just 4 or 5 years ago, before COVID-19. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you. Thank you very much again for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian, for the very interesting presentation. So I would like to ask the speakers if they can put on the cameras now. And yeah, okay, great. So there was a diversity of topics on different countries in the Middle East. We had Qatar, we had the UAE, we had Oman, and then different topics on sustainability, circular economy, over-tourism, cruise tourism, sports events, theme parks. So there is a lot going on in tourism in the Middle East, of course. My question to you as a wrap-up is, I mean, to all the speakers, so anybody can answer, or all of you. We have another 4 minutes. So what is the future of mega events in the Middle East, whether sports, cultural, business, whatever? Is Olympics in the Middle East a matter of time? I mean, we have heard that Saudi Arabia is hosting the Asian Games in the deserts in a mega city that doesn't exist yet. So what is the future of the mega events in the region?
I can go with some just opening comments. To your point around the Olympic Games, there's always been aspirations. We've had 2 failed bids from Qatar, and the IOC has changed the process in terms of a dialogue process. So we see Egypt in terms of MENA region, we see Egypt going for 2036, and Qatar is in continuous dialogue. So I think in terms of future, I think the aspiration is always there. And given that both Qatar as well as Saudi Arabia will host 2030 and 2034 in terms of Asian Games. And then, of course, we have Morocco with the joint bid the joint hosting with Spain and Portugal for the FIFA World Cup. So I think in terms of what I would like to see in terms of legacy and something we could reflect on in terms of going forward, or how we maximize that, is kind of the kind of more regional approach to maximizing benefits and mitigating negative.
Thank you, Dr. Camila. Thank you for your answer. And yes, that would be nice to have a more positive mitigation in the region from these mega events. Anybody else would like to give their opinion on what is the future of mega events in the region?
Well, I think there's a great future in the region for mega events, and as well along with this, doing more marketing for the region as a place for tourism, not far away from Europe, for example. So I think there are a lot of possibilities and opportunities for the region to market themselves, and they already have a large mega infrastructure in airports, ports as well, so, and roads that can accommodate a large number of people. The question is how sustainable this will be for the local community. And I hope that in future, I mean, there are different stakeholders that will hold an event, they will work together ahead of any event and create a responsible event for the whole community in a way where local stakeholders are involved and where they benefit as well.
Thank you, Dr. Manuela. Any other comments from our other guests?
It might be just a small comment here. It's I used to live in Lisbon, so I know the Expo site very well. So this idea of making it a living city, of transforming it into something that becomes part of a living city, the site of a mega event. No 2 places are similar, of course, but here in Dubai, I think it is working. It is something that is Dubai is not Lisbon, of course, but and the times are different. But there's more and more activity at the site of, for instance, COP was organized there. I just mentioned COP. COP was hosted at the site. So this idea of sustainability, we do not need to always think about ecological sustainability and climate change. Sustainability can be using and reusing infrastructures from a mega event. So, of course, how sustainable it is, it depends on political investment as well. These are places that will not develop on their own. There needs to be some political backing to all this. public monies, in other words.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian, for the comments. Dr. William, you have to add something on Expo relation to Lisbon City or Expo City?
I just think we'll see what Saudi Arabia does in 2030, since that's the next mega event coming up with their Expo. It'll be interesting to see what they do, what lessons they learn from Dubai's Expo.
Yeah. Great. So the time is 7 o'clock, so 1 minute over, so we are right on time. I would like to thank all our guest speakers, Dr. Camila, Dr. Manuela, Dr. Adrian, and Dr. William for being with us tonight. And of course, I would like to thank Leontine that organized and marketed this webinar for Atlas. And I would like to wish everybody a good evening. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.